BioCentury this week is brought to you by CBRE, the global leader in commercial real estate services, with a specialized practice dedicated exclusively to life sciences. From early-stage biotechs to established companies scaling biomanufacturing operations, CBRE's life sciences experts help companies find, build, and optimize spaces where discovery happens. With deep market intelligence across the nation's innovation clusters, top-notch facilities, and a network of investors and tenants, CBRE has what it takes to help you succeed. This blend of knowledge and relationships ensures you receive the best advice at every stage, so you can focus on bringing therapies to patients.
The U.S. life sciences industry is at an inflection point. Hiring is on the rise, capital markets are loosening, and the pool of available talent is broadening to more locations. So says a report from CBRE, this month's sponsor of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Today we have a special edition of BioCentury This Week focused on life sciences talent trends and how those trends are driving property demand. My co-host and fellow executive editor, Selena Koch, and I are very pleased to be joined by Ian Anderson. He's Senior Director, Head of U.S. Life Sciences and Healthcare Research at CBRE. First off, Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Excellent. I gotta ask, this tripped me up. Maybe it's obvious to other people, but CBRE is a commercial real estate services company. But we're here to talk about life sciences talent. Indeed, your team has just released a report on life sciences talent trends. Square the circle for me.
Yes, you're right. Probably worthy of some clarification. So CBRE is one of the world's, and is actually the world's largest commercial real estate services provider. It does a myriad number of things in the built environment, too many to name here. But one of the main jobs we have is to find optimal and ideal spaces or properties for companies, and more appropriate here, life sciences companies. So that could be a research and development lab, a wet laboratory in Kendall Square. It could be a downtown office space in Los Angeles, or it could be a manufacturing operation in Pennsylvania or Texas. So we find those locations, we find those properties, we find those spaces for our clients. It's one of the main things we do. However, those spaces are really only as good as the people that occupy them. They are the most important component. And so those spaces don't work particularly well if the companies can't find the right talent to occupy them, they can't recruit the right people, or in some cases, they can't get people to come to work. So as a result, we focus a lot of our research, like this report, ensure our clients and our professionals are as educated as possible in knowing the trends in life sciences talent, not only nationally on more of a macro level, but also looking on a metropolitan area level, how talent, the life sciences industry and talent is trending in Boston versus San Francisco, where have you. But also then when we get much more micro too. And so when you want to find a location in Boston or the Bay Area, where's the best location you want to be, whether it's Peninsula or East Bay or what have you, depending on the geography.
Always the peninsula, people, always the peninsula. I'm sorry, I'm the home team for the peninsula. Selena, of course, would
City. Gotta go
argue city or Dogpatch.
South San Francisco,
Yeah, if you had bought in Dogpatch 20 years ago, man, you'd be loving life right now with UCSF there. So Ian, this report just out last month. I'll drop a link in the show notes for those curious. Let's talk methodology. Anything we need to know about methodology you used for the report?
I think really the main things maybe that are needed is that most of it is data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, at least most of the employment or the talent data we rely on. There's also some venture capital funding data that's from private sources. And then we do a ranking of all the markets in the United States where we feel that offer the most ideal or optimal talent pools for companies to locate in. And so that is a combination of public sources that we use in terms of employment trends like US Bureau of Labor Statistics, but it also requires our subjective judgment to weight certain factors depending on how we feel what ultimately provides an optimal talent.
So did that show up in your report? Is that R&D talent score?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that, if it's how we should think about that when we look at the report. For example, so when you looked region by region, in some regions, in some of the major markets, there was still kind of shrinking employment. Does those very recent data factor into the overall talent score, or should we think of it a little bit more as like a lagging indicator?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So obviously, you know what you're doing with the data here because you're asking those questions, perhaps, or you're asking some good questions. So our ranking of these markets does not take into account the monthly, quarterly, and really not annual changes in life sciences industry employment. What it does track, most of its basis is on, are key professions that drive research and development in the life sciences industry. It's a report that the US Bureau of Labor Statistics creates every year. And it's a moment in time, and it only tracks people with certain occupations. We've identified those occupations. It's not good at looking on an historical time series, this data we get, but it will identify how many bioengineers are in the Bay Area or in Boston, how many biological technicians, how many chemists, and so on. Long story short, it is not based on kind of the ebbs and flows of industry employment. It's based upon people who have certain occupations each year in these markets. But it's also, just to take this another step, if you will, it's also based on people graduating. This is annual data, people graduating with degrees that we would characterize with life sciences expertise. So these are rather slow moving data points and why we only create this report once a year.
Right. Well, thanks for that, Ian. Let's dig in here. One of the top trends, which honestly surprised me, but in a good way, is that the biopharma, life sciences labor market is turning a corner. Hiring's picking up. Biotech, as we know dearly here on the BioCentury This Week podcast, spent years wrestling with a bear market. So when did the page start to turn?
So let me backtrack very quickly. You're right. So our rankings don't take into account some of these, again, as I said, these monthly or quarterly changes in industry employment, right? But it's obviously important because this measures how quickly the industry is expanding or contracting. I'm kind of lucky to be able to report on this because it's just started to, I would say, really clearly change just in 2026. However, we started to see the page start to turn in 2024 when we saw industry in pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturing start to tick up in 2024. That was the first signal we started to see that things were turning around. Then in 2025, we started to see a shift in people employed in testing, medical and diagnostic laboratories in the United States. That started to turn around. And then in 2026, we've really started to see a very discernible uptick in people employed in biotechnology research and development.
So it sounds like it's been sort of a gradual turnaround led by different subsectors, starting with the manufacturing and eventually now maybe seeing some increases in actual like biotech R&D, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, biotech has definitely started to turn around. So we had this 2-year period from November of 2023 through November of 2025, where if you looked at average job growth in the biotech industry, on average, it was actually declining at a negative 0.5% rate. That's a year over year rate. But in 2026 so far, that average, the biotech industry or employment in the biotech industry is growing at about 2.1% on average. So definitely a big turnaround. If I could, I would pull up a chart, or you'd have to look in the report, but you can see these column charts and you can just see it declining or being flat for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden in 2026, there was a significant uptick. And so for a company like CBRE, for us tracking that, we now have 2 of the major sub-industries in life sciences. That's biotech and pharma and medicine, pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturing. Both of those ticking into gear, growing jobs. And so ultimately, there's a lag. Ultimately, that means that there's going to be more demand for space for laboratories and so forth.
Ian, your report shows some of the more favorable life sciences employment growth is happening outside of the three big hubs, Boston, San Francisco, San Diego. Where are you seeing this growth?
Yeah. So when we look at the life sciences industry employment on a metropolitan level basis, that data lags a little bit further. The latest we can get that is for calendar year 2025. But the data just came out about 2 months ago. When we look at that, it was very surprising to me that some of the lesser known hubs or celebrated hubs in the life sciences industry perhaps are doing better than what we'd call the big three, which would be Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego. So, for example, Chicago had some of the fastest growth in the life sciences industry between 2024 and 2025. New York City region, we define that mostly the northern suburbs of New York, Long Island, and the city. We don't include New Jersey in that, but you've got Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia leading the pack in terms of employment growth. And on the other hand, those that are continuing to decline, unfortunately, the Bay Area, Boston, notably, and then a couple of others, maybe not surprisingly, Washington and Baltimore declined in its employment, but obviously some of that's being affected by federal government traction, but obviously NIH cuts there. Another one that kind of surprised me was the Raleigh-Durham metropolitan area actually saw a decline in employment in biotech and pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturing between 2024 and 2025. So that's a little counterintuitive to most because obviously there's so much momentum there. Most of it is on the manufacturing side. My assumption is that a lot of those announcements have not turned into a discernible actually job hiring that is then showing up in the data for the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
And how's Houston faring?
Well, Houston's probably middle of the pack. If you look at total life sciences employment, Houston's done better than most. Yeah. The thing about Houston is it has a very small R&D sector in it. It's mostly more manufacturing. Some of its employment benefits from just the fact that it's a very high growth metropolitan area. Generally speaking, yeah, it's either on average or ahead of the pack.
Yeah, this is one where I think the text of the report said something like Houston having a record year in 2025 for employment, which is great, but then a slight decline in growth, recently. So that just makes me wonder, is it like, what can we glean from that disconnect? Is it kind of a normal pullback after a peak, just fluctuation, or is there a sense in which the growth is not happening on a durable base?
You're talking about Houston right now?
Houston, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple things there. I'm going to probably get in the weeds maybe a little bit too much here, but we have a definition of total life sciences employment we use. And that actually, part of that is beyond just biotech R&D jobs. It's all R&D jobs in the physical and life sciences industry. And so that begins to take into account other industries. It goes a little bit beyond the life sciences industry. What we found in our research is that some of the R&D cuts by the government is affecting markets who have a higher proportion of people in that industry set. So one thing we focus on in the report is we focus on something we called core life sciences employment. So that's just biotech and pharmaceutical. So we focus on that a little bit more. So we avoid some of the noise with some of the other federal government cuts that are affecting the larger R&D industry.
Well, looking at this sort of patchwork of regional data, another kind of disconnect I noticed was between New York City and New Jersey. How do we think about that?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. One is that the outperformance by New York City, it is not happening in the city itself. So it's not happening in the 5 boroughs. It is happening in Westchester County and some of the northern suburbs like Dutchess County, which we include in that definition of New York City as a market, and it's happening in Long Island, but it's not happening in the city itself. And you also notice in these markets that have done a little bit better in terms of core life sciences employment in 2025 and that are continually growing, these are not your heavy biotech R&D markets as much. And those that were flooded with capital during the boom in 2021, for example, these are markets more diversified and historically have more of a pharmaceutical foundation to their life sciences employment. So, these are the historical centers of the pharmaceutical industry, obviously Chicago, New York, a little bit of New Jersey, and Philadelphia too at the head there.
Let's turn to the capital markets. How is the money affecting these trends, and what do the capital markets say about what's to come?
Yeah, that's one thing we do in our research is that everyone wants to know. We share with them the data, the current performance, how these markets are ebbing and flowing. And of course, the next question is what's next? Where do we go from here? So in many cases, what we do is we follow the money. And through our research over the last several years, there is a notable leading indicator in not only the XBI, but also, and as we show in our report, venture capital funding to the life sciences industry. I mean, it's very rough, but generally speaking, about 9 to 18 months after which we see changes in life sciences venture capital funding, do we see a subsequent change in employment. So we've started to see life sciences venture capital funding start to tick up. Certainly not a boom so far. It has, we'd say, turned the corner. It's increasing again. And so the safe statement is that we're going to continue to see life sciences employment ever so slightly increase and improve. But I will tell you, I just pulled the latest venture capital funding data to the life sciences industry through the end of June. That venture capital funding is up 33%. If you tally it for the first half of this year, it's up 33% this year versus the first half of 2025. So things appear to be moving in the right direction. And maybe I don't need to tell some of your listeners, but obviously the XBI matched, may have even broken, I'm not sure precisely, its record for 2021. IPOs are trending the right way, M&A. So there's a whole host of indicators that seem to suggest that life sciences employment is going to get better.
Can we talk a little bit about how those variables relate to another one we haven't discussed yet, which is lab space vacancies? Because I think if I remember this right, what I saw in your report is that there was a pretty sharp decrease, maybe even a record low or high, I guess, in vacancies quite recently, even though the hiring is ticking up. So what do you think? Are people still operating as leanly as they can, or is that just going to follow even later? How do you think about that?
Sure. Yeah. So, one thing, as an aside is that I provide this research and I present it to many of our professionals in the commercial real estate industry, investors, owners of these properties. In many cases, it falls on deaf ears. It's good news. It's wanted to hear, but a lot of this has not transpired into a substantial change into what is a very overbuilt life sciences laboratory sector. We've seen just a slight stabilization in vacancy of lab space around the United States, but it is still arguably as high as it has ever been. It's absolutely the highest it's ever been for all the records we have going back. But it's going to take some time for those good trends to just translate into making an impact for many of these people who own this lab space. So a vacancy is still going to be abundant for a little while here.
Okay, and this one's not in the scope of your report, so I'm not sure what you'll say about it, but how does trends in AI and automation relate to how lab space is going to be used in the future?
That's obviously a billion-dollar question. What I can tell you is that a couple things. One, we have not seen a discernible impact from AI on lab use. And that's generally speaking, that's looking at data across the country. That's tracking markets from Boston to the Bay Area to San Diego, so on and so forth. It could be a little bit different in the Bay Area versus, let's say, Raleigh, Durham or Philadelphia or something. But on average, we really have not yet seen a discernible impact from AI on this.
Interesting. So you had a one metric in there that was, I think, space per employee, maybe, and that seemed to drop quite steeply recently.
Yes.
Do you think that could be a factor there?
It absolutely could. And we can speculate on it. So what you're referring to is that, what we saw in the boom, we just saw companies taking lots of excess space. As we can imagine, many had perhaps unrealistic expectations for growth, overly optimistic. So they took a lot of excess space. And you could see, according to our research, that the amount of space per life sciences employee in the United States just started to shoot up decisively. And that peaked around 2022 as the tide turned on the industry. And since then, what's happened is that companies have started to get rid of that excess space. They've started to sublease it to other companies. They've started to downsize, right size. That's most of the story. But as for AI affecting it, it's possible, certainly could be a factor. But when I look at actual leases signed by life sciences companies around the United States, there's no significant shift that those leases are getting smaller.
Good news.
Ian, another thing you're watching is emerging talent, where folks are studying life sciences at U.S. colleges, universities, what they're studying, where they're studying. What have you found?
Well, there's a couple things. First off, the bad news is that there are less students focusing on life sciences disciplines in the latest academic data, which is the academic year ending 2024. So we have seen over several years, there's only so far I went back in the data, but the trend over many years, at least the past decade, is an increasing number of students focused on degrees. Again, we can use, say generally, with life sciences expertise. Generally speaking, that's degrees in biological and biomedical sciences, but that's steadily been increasing for many years. The latest data shows that for the first time in many years, the number of students actually declined. And it wasn't just the numbers. This wasn't just demographics. If you look at all degrees in the United States, there's a lower share of people focusing on degrees with life sciences expertise. So that's kind of the bad news. If you peel back the layers of the onion and you look at some of the degrees people are studying with, a couple of things have happened. One, it seems to be that people are a little less interested in biology, ever so slightly, in some of the biological sciences. And you can see a shift towards pharmaceutical sciences and more clearly towards bioinformatics and biomath, and probably some of those degrees that are more appropriate for the AI revolution. So that's one thing you see. Another thing we've noticed too is that, we get back to these secondary markets that have been doing better in terms of life sciences employment. We're also seeing that more graduates with life sciences experience are coming from colleges outside of Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego. One piece of research we did was we went back and we looked at 2012, and we looked at the number of PhDs graduating with life sciences expertise. And out of the top 50 schools graduating these PhDs, about 10%, 9.6% were graduating from schools out of the Bay Area, Boston, or San Diego. When we look at the latest data, it's not a huge shift, but the latest data shows only 8.4% of those PhDs were coming from colleges or universities in those top three markets. The long story short is we see this broadening of the pie where life sciences talent is not only growing, but where it's emerging from. And more of that talent, ever so slightly, is coming a little bit less out of colleges. And again, the Bay Area, Boston, and San Diego, and is coming out of places like Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. And even beyond that, it's coming from places like Gainesville or Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I did see Gainesville on there.
Yeah.
U of F. All right. Well, Let's wrap things up with a ranking. Again, we're speaking to Ian Anderson of CBRE. Everybody loves rankings. I particularly do. I know you have yours, Ian, for optimal pools of existing and emerging life sciences talent. Now, I'm kind of going to guess Boston and San Francisco are near the top. Are there any surprises in the list? How did the rankings shake out?
Yeah. So there's a couple things, just as a quick backdrop to the way we rank this. So we rank these markets, these optimal talent pools for life sciences, for the life sciences industry, based upon the volume, the number of people with certain life sciences professions, where they are, the number of graduates with life sciences expertise coming out of colleges, universities. We also track the density or the concentration in these different markets. So yeah, as you said, in our rankings, this is the 5th time we've done this report. And again, leading the pack, maybe not surprisingly, are Boston and San Francisco. I have to say that every year when I look at the data, it is really shocking, not only the number of some of these key occupations, but the density that come out of Boston, which obviously gives it this number 1 ranking. For example, I think it's bioengineers, the number of bioengineers, biological technicians in Boston, when you compare it to other markets around the United States, it's almost jarring to see how many they have and how dense they are in that market. But so yeah, Boston and San Francisco at the top. What I think is a little unusual to people when they see this ranking are some of the other markets that are ranked very highly. So the Washington-Baltimore region, New York, New Jersey, Los Angeles, Orange County, and maybe Philadelphia. All those markets are ranked above San Diego. So people ask, how does that happen? And it happens just due to the sheer numbers of people with life sciences occupations or graduates with life sciences expertise coming out of LA, New York, Philly, for example. And that helps give those markets a bit of an edge. And so, when we mention to our clients and where they need to access talent to grow their businesses, what we say is you just can't overlook the sheer numbers coming out of those markets. We know, you want to go to San Diego or the Bay Area or Boston, but if you are overlooking the people that are coming out of, Penn, UCLA, Columbia, or some of the existing talent, you may be overlooking that. Last thing I'll just say is some of the surprises, a lot of that stays fairly static each year. The data doesn't change significantly, but we do see these up and comers in the data. A couple of them first, Madison, Wisconsin continues to impress us. It's not a huge metropolitan area, but it's concentration of certain life sciences researchers there. Dallas is another one. Salt Lake City is one with considerable momentum. Pittsburgh as well. And then Miami, Fort Lauderdale, which isn't probably on the radar of many, but Miami not only shows up perhaps a surprising number of emerging talent, graduates, but existing talent as well. And they've also had a considerable amount of investment over the past year too, venture capital investment into that region too, which might cause that sector there to grow even further.
Salt Lake City one is interesting. I kind of wonder if having a kind of cutting edge AI company, Recursion, there as a local acts as like a catalyst, or if there's some other bigger factors.
Well, there's a couple things there. Some of these Western metros, I know I'm using the term a little loosely, but obviously have a heavier tech presence. The med tech industry is stronger there too, but also, although it is a bit of a jump, but historically, at least during the boom, there was some overflow of Salt Lake City being somewhat of a more favorable alternative to the Bay Area too.
Mm-hmm. We should give a shout out to Seattle, Jeff. It's just behind San Diego in the rankings. I don't know if
there we go.
Anybody, but we recently BioCentury held a Grand Rounds conference there, which the point of that conference is to focus at the academia industry interface. So University of Washington, Allen Institute, lots of talent in Seattle.
And next year we're going to Houston.
We're going to Houston, also in the rankings.
Yep.
Sounds great. Well, we've been speaking with Ian Anderson, Senior Director, Head of U.S. Life Sciences and Healthcare Research at CBRE, the commercial real estate services company, and this month's sponsor of BioCentury This Week podcast. Ian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Great speaking with you.
Excellent. And we'll be back next week on the BioCentury This Week podcast.
BioCentury would like to thank CBRE for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about how CBRE's unmatched expertise, resources, and connections empower life sciences companies, visit cbre.com/life sciences.